Missouri School of Journalism, welcome to Global Journalist. I'm Jason McClure. On this week's show, we are looking at the protests in Hong Kong that have attracted worldwide attention. Students and citizens alike have been protesting China's decision to manage the region's 2017 general election. Back in the 1980s, the United Kingdom and China negotiated a treaty that ceded Hong Kong back to China. According to that treaty, the people who run Hong Kong's government are eventually to be selected through universal suffrage. In 2007, it was decided that the 2017 election would be the first to meet that criteria. Protesters say that what China has proposed, though, falls far short of universal suffrage. China wants to pre-select candidates for Hong Kong's government based on guidelines it sets, instead of allowing any candidate to run for any position. Today on Global Journalist, we look at the protests and the situation in Hong Kong and what it could mean for the region's future. We are joined today from London by Sam Wilde, a freelance journalist who recently returned from Hong Kong, where he filmed a documentary about the democracy movement. We're also joined from Hong Kong by Bridget Hall, a freelance journalist from South Africa. Welcome to both of you. Bridget Hall, you're on the ground in Hong Kong. Can you give us a sense of what the mood is like? What are you seeing on the streets? What's the reaction from the police today as you speak?
Well, up until a few hours ago, there was a very little police presence after Sunday, when everyone was tear-gassed and they received a lot of criticism. So up until then, it sort of withdrew, and then this afternoon, you saw the police going into the government head offices with a whole bunch of equipment and ammunition, and so people are feeling a bit uneasy that they might try and clear the area tonight. Organizers did issue an ultimatum that CY Leung would have to resign by the end of today, or that they would occupy more government spaces. So they're not too sure if the police are preparing for that. A lot of people have rallied now in Admiralty, and things are looking a little more uneasy than what they have the past few days, which have been very peaceful and jovial and very calm.
And so is there a sense of fear that there could be some sort of violent confrontation then?
I think there is. I was at a press conference earlier where the organizers warned people of this. They also told them how to recognize official organizers and who to look out for to get direction from. So I think there is a little bit of uneasiness about that the area could be cleared tonight, as tomorrow is a work day. The past 2 days in Hong Kong have been public holidays, but tomorrow everyone needs to go back to work. The government issued a press statement, again, calling for people to disperse peacefully, that they would try to go back to work tomorrow, and they really need their offices.
And Sam, you spent quite some time in Hong Kong filming your documentary on the democracy movement. Tell us, what are you hearing from your sources, from some of the people that you had been in contact with?
Well, there's a lot of, as you know, there's unprecedented numbers from what I gather of people on the streets with this incredible footage I saw recently of, which was taken from a droid? No, a zone. What do you call those things? A drone that just showed hundreds of thousands of people in an area of the city that's usually just full of traffic or whatever, like major roads. The people that I've spoken to seem to be saying that at the moment it's all kind of like a really great festival atmosphere and everything, but that some people are worried that it could be like Tiananmen Square 2.0, if you like. But most people that I've spoken to seem to be pretty confident that they'll get CK Leung, the chief executive, to stand down. To be honest with you, I don't know. I don't think anybody does. In a way, it seems sometimes that Hong Kong is like the jewel in the crown for the Chinese mainland state, by virtue of the fact that it's such a lucrative city. It brings in so much money. And the Chinese mainland officials accept that with that comes this kind of limited democratic model that they have in Hong Kong. So I don't know how much they really want to disrupt that. But at the same time, as people keep on saying, like,
But do you get the
China,
sense that they could
yeah,
halt the democratic movement, or that they could leave a democratic movement in Hong Kong and stop it from spreading to mainland China?
it's really hard to tell um, the impact that Hong Kong has on China, and to what extent Chinese people see Hong Kong as being a bit of an exceptional case. Within Hong Kong itself, one of the things that surfaced from the people that I've spoken to, both in the course of making the documentary and recently, is that Hong Kongers are beginning to become more aware of themselves as Hong Kongers, no longer being British subjects when they were part of the British Empire, and no longer and nor seeing themselves really as just another Chinese city. They're getting an identity of their own. I mean, I know that I'm talking in massive generalizations here, but it is interesting to note that the motor for the change that's been seen on the streets comes from what they call the post-80s generation, which is younger people all born after 1980. And that would make sense that they've got this new identity that in which they're seeking to create a Hong Kong that makes sense to them. And from what I gauge, it seems that they want greater levels of democracy. And that includes, for example, the capacity to be able to stand for and elect a chief executive of their own choosing.
Bridget, you've been out talking to some of the protesters. Is it clear what their plan is for the coming days, for the coming weeks? And are they all on the same page in terms of what their goals are?
I think absolutely. The first thing they want is for CY Leung to step down. And the thing that is quite apparent, they kind of mockingly put up this number, 689, I think it is. And I believe that's the amount of votes he got. But he's not even a popular candidate to begin with. So it's very clear that they definitely don't want him to be their leader anymore, especially after what happened on Sunday, because they don't feel like he has the best, he does not have Hong Kong people's best interests at heart. As for how long this is going to go on for, I'm not too sure. It seems to be tricky. But I don't know if people are going to return back to work. The thing that's special about Hong Kong is the way it's designed. It's very compact. It's not that difficult to still go to work and go home and protest at the same time. It seems kind of, because it's so compact, it's kind of not that inconvenient at the moment if you're taking part.
So do you get the sense that these protests could still grow larger? I mean, we've already seen tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people in the streets.
I think that's about its capacity. I think everyone who's wanted to come would have come, especially over these two public holidays. I think it's about seeing how long it will last and who is going to give on either front. There seems to be no budge from the government side, so we'll have to see what happens at midnight.
Yeah, Sam, we've been hearing recently that the Hong Kong government's plan is just to sort of wait these protests out. What do you make of that?
I was thinking that would probably be the best strategy from an establishment perspective, by virtue of the fact that they've got the resources available to them and those on the street don't, and they have limited patience, I guess. I would say at the same time, though, that two of the greatest achievements that have been made recently and in the past are both connected to protests. The first is what we're seeing on the streets now, which is that this will have and is having an impact on Hong Kong markets. I mean, I know that the Hang Seng took a tumble around the time of when the protests first kicked off, and no doubt the Hang Seng index will be down tomorrow. That is an achievement that the protesters have brought about because it affects the economic well-being of the city, and that's the kind of thing that the authorities and the establishment will take notice of. And that's where I think its greatest success lies. And the other thing was that's also connected to protests is that around 2010 there were big protests around the decision that was made by the government to build a very expensive train line from Hong Kong to Guangzhou city in southern China. And on the basis of that, you could argue this massive reform came in where they increased the number of seats in the Legislative Assembly from 60 to 70. And increased the number of democratically elected seats from 30 to 40, but at the same time kept these 30 seats that are elected specifically by the corporate sector within the Legislative Assembly as well. So the point I'm making is that actually, slowly but surely, these mass protest movements do actually gain concessions from the establishment. So I think it's just a very, very slow dance that's going on.
You're listening to Global Journalist. I'm Jason McClure. Today on Global Journalist, we look at the protests and the situation in Hong Kong and what it could mean for the region's future. We're joined today from London by Sam Wilde, a freelance journalist and documentary maker who recently returned from Hong Kong. We're also joined by Bridget Hall, a freelance journalist based in Hong Kong, originally from South Africa. Joining us now on the line is Professor Sing Ming. He's an associate professor at Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. Professor Ming, welcome to Global Journalist.
Hi, hello.
I understand you're at the site of protests now. What can you tell us about what you're seeing and what the mood is?
Well, at the site, the student leaders, they have warned the government that should they give no concession on democratic reform, they will consider rushing into the office of the chief executive. And then in return, the police has sent in a lot of heavy ammunition, including the plastic bullets, the guns, and they also threatened to use with the tear gas to the students storm into the building.
So it looks like there is a potential for clashes, although you're saying right now it sounds like the police would use rubber bullets and tear gas.
Right. I mean, the police said that should students really storm into the building, they would consider that kind of ammunition. But still, the storming hasn't occurred yet. And I just received the news that a famous leader, former leader of China's Tiananmen Square, massacre, who is now staying in Taiwan, he has urged the students in Hong Kong not to storm into the chief executive office. And I've heard that some of the students listen to his advice. And so I guess, as far as I know, there's a stalemate now. Both sides have not used physical force yet.
Now, we're hearing that the Chinese government, the Hong Kong government, may just try to wait the protests out. Obviously, if the students storm the building, that's a major escalation. Where do you see this confrontation going?
I think there are two possibilities. One is that if the students, among the students, they also have hardliners and softliners. So should the hardliners win the upper hand, they might still try to storm some buildings, to maintain the momentum of the movement, because they realize the danger that if they do nothing and just sit there, the entire movement will be thinned down, and participants may lose enthusiasm. So that's one possibility. Another possibility is that I also know that some of the let's say some scholars and some movement activists, they would like the students to consider having a tactical retreat, trying to tone down their aggressiveness, and in order to recuperate. So if this is going to happen, the movement may drag even a bit longer. So I think two possibilities are still open. We don't know which way it will go.
Bridget, you're in Hong Kong now, and one of the things that's characterized this movement is that it is being led by people who are apparently quite young. One of the leaders profiled recently was just 17, I saw reading in the New York Times and other news outlets. What do we know about some of the people that are leading this, and how have they achieved such a massive organization?
Well, I think it's quite amazing that this group of young people have done this. And it's kind of what happened with them on Friday evening that sort of turned everything on its face. I don't think Occupy Central, ironically Central's not being occupied anymore, could have imagined this kind of turnaround. So after the students on Friday evening stormed the building and were later circled and pepper sprayed and detained, that really brought out the people in their masses in support of these people, these kids, So I think that's really what's turned this event around.
And Professor Ming, you've been studying these issues for some time. To you, what is different about this movement than previous protests and democracy demonstrations in Hong Kong?
Well, I think one stark difference between this movement and the previous one has been the age of the leaders. The leaders of this movement are actually around just from 16, 17 to early 20s. That is, they are either the secondary school students or the university students. They seem to be very determined to be ready for some personal cause like arrest by the police. And yet they actually, some of them, they were already arrested on July the 2nd, but then they stay on and they stress that without the courage to weather the storm and to continue with the movement, they said that Hong Kong will be destroyed, by Beijing, given all kinds of interferences from Beijing with Hong Kong in terms of the erosion of civil liberties, the rule of law, the procedural justice, and so on and so forth. So I think this is the greatest difference, because in the past, the movement had been led by some middle-class politicians or some mid-aged NGO leaders. But now the leadership has changed, and those previous leaders have taken the back seat, trying to back up the students from the back.
And Sam Wild, what can you tell us about the role that social media has played in the establishment, the organization of this movement?
It's the first time actually that, and I'm ashamed to say this, that I've really engaged Twitter. And I think it's at times like this that you can see the role of Twitter and its immediacy. So I've been following it on Twitter and then also Facebook, and it's just been brilliant. I mean, all of the stuff, the immediacy that you get, and also the personal contact that you get as somebody like myself who's got a personal and direct contact with the city, but I'm miles away in London, but yet I still feel like I can be there and watch it. I just wanted to say quickly that I also watched these and was there in 2010 when there were these big anti-rail demonstrations. And so it's really lovely to see all of those people on the streets again, but this time it's in much greater numbers. I had just wanted to say very quickly something that I think connects to this point, that there's a lot of younger people who are driving this movement forward. And that is that the Hong Kong, like many countries, but Hong Kong in particular, is incredibly economically divided. There's a massive level of inequality. I mean, this has been proved by studies from Gini coefficients, United Nations. It's a very deeply divided, economically deeply divided country, and a lot of young people who are highly educated are struggling to get jobs, to buy houses, to participate in society in that way. And I think that's one of the motors. And underneath all of that, that has been slightly overshadowed by the fixation with the chief executive, is the fact that of 70 seats in the Hong Kong's Legislative Assembly, 30 are directly elected by the corporate sector. That means hotel and retail sector, accountancy sector, the legal sector. They have their own seat in Parliament. And as a result, it means that in general, the Hong Kong government tends to favour and make decisions in the interests of the corporate sectors. And that, I feel, is one of the contexts out of which this kind of resentment has boiled up.
You're listening to Global Journalist. I'm Jason McClure. Today on Global Journalist, we look at the protests and the situation in Hong Kong and what it could mean for the region's future. We are joined today from London by Sam Wild, a freelance journalist who recently returned from Hong Kong. From Hong Kong by Ming Sing, an associate professor at Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, and from Hong Kong by Bridget Hall, a South African freelance journalist based there now. For more Global Journalist content, visit us online at globaljournalist.org. There you can listen to or watch episodes from our archive and read in-depth articles on international affairs and free press issues. We're also on social media. You can like us on Facebook or follow us on Twitter at Global Journ. And Professor Ming, I wanted to ask you as well about the economic repercussions of these protests because, as Sam Wild had mentioned earlier in the show, there has been fallout on the Hong Kong exchanges, but really worldwide during the last week of September, we've seen global stock markets hit hard by the events based here. What role do you see the business community playing in these, and how does that affect the calculation of Beijing and how they handle this?
No, I think the tentative hiccup in the stock market, both in Europe and United States, have not been caused by Hong Kong. They have been rather caused by some poor figures divulged in the last few days, and also some equally poor figures in Europe. Whereas for Hong Kong, it really depends on how long this tension and confrontation will end. It's going to end very quickly. According to a local economist estimate, we will only lose a very marginal negligible proportion of our GDP. So it shouldn't be a matter. But I think if Beijing issues a very bloody crackdown, that can trigger a more sustainable democracy struggle in Hong Kong. Because as we saw a couple of days ago, when the police was regarded as having overused the violence against the peaceful protesters, tens of thousands of people stormed in the streets and tried to brave for further firearms of the police. So I think we are really at the crossroads. But one point I'd like to stress is that I don't think the kind of Tiananmen Square crackdown would happen in Hong Kong, because Hong Kong is the third most important financial center in Asia and in the world. It's simply too important for China to further modernize. China has used Hong Kong to internationalize renminbi and also gain a lot of capital by issuing the IPOs. So China simply will find it politically and economically too costly to have another Tiananmen Square kind of crackdown.
But Professor Ming, would it not be more costly to the Chinese government if the democracy movement spreads from Hong Kong to Guangzhou or Shanghai or to other cities on mainland China?
Now, obviously, that is exactly the greatest fear of Beijing. And as far as I know, they have imposed a very strong sanction against those who try to send the news about Hong Kong to mainland China. So I think Beijing would try to mobilize all its muscle to stop the infiltration of news in that regard from Hong Kong to mainland China. But so that is not, I don't think that's an issue for Beijing for the time being. But what matters more is how is the Hong Kong government, which has been widely seen as a representative for Beijing, going to handle this crisis. At the present, the Hong Kong government, led by C.Y. Leung, has behaved in a very dictatorial manner and has made no concession at all. So I believe the legitimacy of this government will further subside with time. So I think that is a more important issue for Beijing in the short term and in the medium term.
And for you, is it clear what the protesters want? They've talked about the resignation of C.Y. Leung. Sam Wilde has talked about the makeup of the legislature there. Are they looking merely for the resignation of C.Y. Leung or some future guarantees about suffrage, or does it go beyond that to further constitutional reforms?
Now, I believe they try to ask for C.Y. Leung to step down. That's number one. And number two, they also try to ensure Beijing will live up to its promise in Hong Kong's mini constitution that Beijing will allow Hong Kong to practice universal suffrage according to the international standard. And tonight, actually, the student statement have backed off a little bit. They no longer mention the resignation of CY because Beijing and Hong Kong SL government emphasized very strongly in the last 2 days that this is not an option. So I think some of the students, they are considering seriously some tactical retreat, but of course there is inattention. There are hardliners and softliners, and it's still too early to say which side can call the shots.
Sam Wilde, I wanted to ask you, what do you make of the response of Western governments, the U.S. government, but in particular the British government to this democracy movement? I know that there has been quite a bit of criticism about how muted those reactions have been.
Well, I can't speak of the reaction from the United States government because I haven't really followed that. No, I just discovered recently that actually the agreement signed between Britain and China over the handover of Hong Kong back to Chinese rule in 1997 actually ties the fate of the city to the United Kingdom to some extent. But really, at the end of the day, it's been very, very, as you say, muted. And I think that's partly because, or largely because, British business interests, British political establishment are reluctant to criticise China too heavily by virtue of the fact that we're so reliant on our economic ties with them. I just wanted to add to the point of people being muted that it's interesting to note that lots of journalists that I've spoken to, lots of people that I've spoken to who have sought to do stories about Hong Kong have always struggled to get anybody from what you could call an establishment line to articulate what it is that they believe in. And it feels to me it's because really at the end of the day they don't really, it's not something that they feel is that defensible. Likewise with the United Kingdom government, they haven't really said much. It's because at the end of the day I don't think they really feel that comfortable to come out and really try and defend their position. And it's just a shame that we're in a situation where the political process is such that the establishment who've got the power and who have the capacity to make the change basically ignore the issue. And that says a lot about the nature of the relationship between those who are governing and those who are governed at the moment, I personally feel.
And Bridget Hall, I want to give the last word to you. What do you make of the press coverage in Hong Kong itself of the protests? We've heard in mainland China that news of these protests has been largely blacked out. Social media has been blocked there for quite some time. What about within Hong Kong itself? How fast is news of the protests and events on the ground spreading?
Well, that has been quite amazing. I think through social media that we have access to it, is that it's been quite rigorously covered. You're seeing live updates from SCMP, from the New York Times, from a whole lot of global institutions, and also freelancers like myself, local bloggers, but also from just the people on the street. It's a very technology savvy kind of place, and you see people taking photographs and uploading. So it's been. I think I read I saw an infographic earlier about how much it's the hashtag Occupy Central is being tweeted. I think it's like 200 times every minute, if I'm not mistaken. So it's one of the most documented, protests that you're going to see. So we're very lucky out on this side in being able to bring the attention to the rest of the world. And I think kind of didn't really get it until Sunday,
That's all for this edition of Global Journalist, a production of the Reynolds Journalism Institute and the Missouri School of Journalism. Our thanks to our guests Sam Wild, Ming Singh, and Bridget Hall for joining us. Our executive producer is Casey Morrell. Our lead producer this week is Tatiana Darin, with assistance from Bida Egbali, Anna Kowalska, and Matt Zuzola. Travis McMillan from RJI is our technical director, and Pat Akers of KBIA is our audio engineer. For all of us at Global Journalist, I'm Jason McClure. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.